Hello, hello, hello everyone! It's Chelnaga, and today we are going to talk about something I call the Assassin's Creed syndrome. Ooh. So what this is when you have a series that might not start out initially, any good. It might start out kind of bad or downright awful, but the sequel substantially improves upon the first iteration of the game in the series. So sometimes it changes directions entirely, sometimes fan feedback's taken into consideration, or any combination of those things. I named this syndrome after Assassin's Creed 1 because while it had some good ideas, it had a really bad setting, terribly bland, boring game. The protagonist was also quite bad. I found absolutely no enjoyment in Altair. Several of the mechanics that weren't introduced to the series yet that would help alleviate frustration, or they were unrefined to the point where there was little, actual use out of them. Or they were just really annoying. Like the guards randomly, you ride past them on a horse, not even ride, just gallop, just whatever a horse does, trot past them, and they'll just annoy you. That's horrible. For me personally, these kind of things make the game entirely unplayable. I haven't finished it to this day. I just refuse to put up with the padding, the mechanics, the boredom. I didn't like almost anything about it. So, just to give you a good idea what sort of bar there is, although obviously that's not a constant thing. It'll be slightly different for each of the games I'm about to mention. So, of the following games, they don't have to be awful games exactly, but they could have been awful versus their own sequels when they came out. The thing is that these games substantially improved with their second game, or first sequel. Right, let's get the obvious one out of the way, Assassin's Creed 1 to 2. This is the name of my syndrome, and, I've listed some reasons, but more in depth it would have to be that the first game had some heavy gameplay padding, a very boring protagonist, it had some storytelling issues, incredibly boring, samey missions, go here, kill this guy, and then, you'd be stuck in a minutes-long little death requiem with them sometimes. The first game's Desmond sections were absolutely the worst thing. They were boring, uninteresting, sterile. The fun was sucked out of Desmond sections completely, which is a shame because, narrative-wise, it had a place in the game. They just screwed it up. They made it completely uninteresting. This is also when the widespread fandom hatred of Desmond starts to emerge, because he's just the worst thing. Now, the second game comes out and iterates brilliantly on the first one by offering you more and more diverse missions, a different sympathetic protagonist, a more cohesive story with much better and larger supporting cast in a new, structurally and thematically impressive and interesting environment. So, Italy was just brilliant. It was a beauty to behold. Running along the rooftops was better. It all felt more connected and more, maybe not real, but solid. The architecture was, they went and researched it, so it's relatively faithful. Other enhanced gameplay elements include combat options, stealth options, quality of life improvements, so you had more ways of fighting enemies. The combat was slightly more viable, but you ideally didn't want to do that. With stealth, you could hide here or do this, or not even engage some enemies sometimes. Quality of life improvements just, they cut down significantly on the padding. They made your traversal a little bit easier. There was more leeway, I'm hesitant to say. They just made the game fun to play. It wasn't as off-putting as 1 was. Also, happily, Desmond's present-day mechanics were expanded, so he's now using some of his ancestors' learned parkour skills to be slightly less irritating, but only slightly. His sections involved, skills he picked up traversing through Ezio's memories, and that added to the gameplay. You were no longer this harmless, useless, boring white man just sitting there spouting exposition or being spouted at. You had a little bit of action going on, and it wasn't a lot, and it wasn't great, but it was certainly more than whatever 1 gave us, which was nothing. A personal darling of mine is the Persona series, and this next one is a bit of a dagger to its heart, because Persona 1 was an absolutely abysmal first game. I hate it. I hate every single thing about it. It has almost no redeeming features. It was terrible. Terrible. Seriously. First of all, just as a core mechanic, you had a very large damage range, which means that an attack that does, I don't know, 50 damage might next time do 120, or it might do 80, or it might do 50 again. You couldn't really count on, oh right, I'll take this guy out, because I have an estimate of what this guy's health is, and this should do that much damage. It won't do that much damage, because random combat's not fun. I also didn't like that the actual combat was incredibly slow. They were trying something new, and the system and the awkwardness of the PS1, with its limitations, that is, would have somewhat justified how bad it came out, but a lot of animations took too long and played too slowly, so you were waiting for fluff to finish, to do often inconsequential damage, or miss with a status effect. That's fun. 20-second cast time, it missed. It also used an awkward sort of grid-based positioning system where if you were here, you couldn't attack with this, but you could with this, but it wouldn't do any damage because your character stat was wrong. It was an absolute nightmare. Do not recommend. The cast was entirely uninteresting. All of them. Bland, boring, terrible. I did not like a single one of them. There was not a spark of interest from me, and I'm not overly critical like this usually. I might moan and bitch about something for a little while, but I'm not gonna put it down this hard. But it made dialogue painful to read when there was no personality, and let's not get into the translation, which wasn't perfect. Blatantly padded gameplay did not help its case. One good instance is I think fairly late dungeon. You go to a place, you're in a cutscene, so you fall down a trap, you fall down several floors, you have to make your way back up. It's a confusing, winding, annoying dungeon, but you get out, there's a save point, so you think, alright, I'm going to fight the boss now. You get up, and a cutscene, and you drop down the exact same frickin' dungeon again for no valid reason. Why do I have to redo the thing I've just done? If you want to make me grind, give me a f***ing side quest. Hatred. And you had to backtrack through a lot of areas. Like, it wasn't, you had an overall world map where you could bypass locations sometimes, but there was a barrier. I can't quite remember what it was, but there was, I think, a literal barrier you couldn't get past unless the story called for it, and then you had to go past it, and it was just terrible. I'm fine with going back to old areas if it's changed enough to be meaningful. If you pick up something from... This isn't Persona, but if you, go to a ruins and you raid it and you pick up an item, and then, 10 hours later you find that the ruins have been flooded completely by accident, and that pushed away some walls, and it lets you explore the ruins deeper, and there's another artifact, some extra lore, a giant or enemy inside you can fight. This creativity doesn't have to come from high science, but I found that mindless backtracking is one of the worst things in games. You're trying to have fun. You're not going to have fun doing the same thing you've done 2 or 3 times. Excuse me. So this is just a pet peeve of mine, but I'm still listing it because, I'm the one doing this, but I absolutely despise games that force you into a first-person dungeon exploration thing. Where you go forward and you turn left and turn right, but you don't actually move, and it's all terribly confusing, and you're supposed to draw your own map and have all this piddly nonsense that you're supposed to waste your time on. You're not actually playing the game, you're being your own dungeon master. But, without friends, that's not even that fun. I just don't like that. I hate the entire Shin Megami Tensei series as a result. I've given whatever one was on the SNES a try. I couldn't. It's too outdated now. It is out. It is gone. Please do not ever revisit this. And as a disclaimer, I didn't actually put this in my script, but I have played Persona Q, which is supposed to be Persona's sort of this dungeon exploration with Etrian Odyssey's difficulty and some mechanics, I suppose. I didn't like it, because guess what? It ended up being an incredibly simple game, relying on the 2 or 3 overpowered characters you can bring in a team, making them more overpowered consciously, and then just hoping you can outlast some of the more difficult enemies. And the dungeons were often constructed, one floor was constructed to be 2 hours long, because you had to tiptoe past everything twice, and the enemies would get first attacks and wreck you and status affect you. I do not consider that type of game legitimate. I know that Etrian Odyssey is about difficulty, but difficulty and fake difficulty are two very, very different things. So that might contribute. So I tried to get over my hatred of this first-person dungeon crawling thing by giving Persona Q a chance. I was really not interested. Ending fatigue had set in like mad. I just wanted to be over it. The final dungeon was too long, too confusing, too annoying, and most of the floors actually relied on gimmicks as opposed to straightforward gameplay. So that wasn't fun either. Back to my script now. For Persona 1, the original PS1 game I'm talking about, by the way, battles, besides being slow anyway, tended to take too long because some enemies were either just massive damage sponges, so you could keep wailing on them for ages, or sometimes tougher than the boss of the dungeon they were in. So that's not even statistically, but they could make the battle drag out far longer with something like, I forget if the actual status effect was called charm, but confusion, where you don't have control over your character and they do the wrong move. So the team falls apart, maybe they attack your own team and you have to heal instead of attacking. Ugh. Frustrating. Now, this is, Persona 1 was a branch off of the Shin Megami Tensei series, like I said. That's where the demon recruiting and first-person awful navigation comes from. And I think that they wanted to sort of keep that as a first step out. So they were going to leave their comfort zone with this exploration of fundamentally what a person's psyche is and or can be, which is a good step. But keeping their cards that close to their chest with not so much innovation isn't a favor for them. Unfortunately, while the game was absolutely horrible, which is, it's truly regrettable, I am very happy that this managed to give birth to the popular Persona series. It only ever broke into proper mainstream popularity with the release of Persona 3, and later 4, but now we have a 5th one coming and the entire world's waiting to see what's going to happen. So, this is possibly one of the best instances of my first game is horrible, with almost no redeeming features, and then it goes on to a literal superstar series. I cannot think of a more meteoric rise, to be honest. Assassin's Creed shot up as well, sure, but then they ruined it by releasing milking it, to release yearly sequels that almost didn't function at all. So they've pissed away their goodwill. If they haven't, the games are just dreadfully boring, because aside from AC4 letting you pirate around the seas, it was basically the same thing. So, Another game that I'm going to mention here is Just Cause 1. I actually played this when it was relatively fresh, so I don't have that many memories of it. But I remember that it had control issues. It wasn't sort of intuitive. It wasn't sort of fun. It always felt like there was a bit of, not control input, but it wasn't as sharp as it could have been. It felt like it was a bit lazy and more tailored to, I think it was actually a console port, which might have explained that. They didn't optimize things correctly. Gameplay itself took itself way more seriously than Just Cause 2 did, so you had a lot of less fun, stupid moments. You were basically GTA Honolulu. It was very island, Hawaii, Mediterranean, and that was it. Cars, roads, go here, blow that up, kill this guy. It was absolutely nothing unique or fun about it. In addition, the gameplay was just slower. It was just really, really, everything took ages to do. And there wasn't sort of an easy access you could rely on to mobility to get you from one place to the other. If your vehicle blows up because the physics engine hate you, then you had to hoof it or go to a road and smack someone out of their car. And GTA does this, but it's grounded in it tries to be grounded in realism, so it's got a sufficient excuse. But if you play this island GTA, where 80% of what you do is jungles and oceans, you're gonna have a bad time, bro. So my track record with this game is I played 2 or 3 hours. I never went back to complete it because I was bored out of my skull. And there's no disdain here like I have for Persona 1. There's just utter boredom. I couldn't bring myself to see maybe around that corner. I just gave up. Now then Just Cause 2 comes out. It adds faster, more ludicrous gameplay with way more action. Like, the first thing you do in Just Cause 2 is dive out of a infiltrating helicopter, chasing a dead body with sensitive information on him on, several thousands of feet in the air, and before you splat on the ground. It's pretty good. Then you immediately proceed to use your grappling hook to go up places, blow up big old radar dishes with rocket launchers and grenades. It's the game's big open arm saying, "Hey baby, I missed you and I'm gonna change." And it was brilliant. It was so colorful and stupid and fun. The grappling hook alone let you go up miles-long buildings with ease when, once you mastered it, because the controls are still a bit of a pain, but they react better to what you do. And it was a console port, sadly. But it ushered in so much more than the first game could ever hope to have done. You could summon vehicles. Like, if you unlock them, you could summon vehicles. If you had a big stretch of road, you could have a little jet or a helicopter, and you could take off. You could just go across everything with high speed. You didn't have to use a car or a grappling hook. It was brilliant. It was so liberating to be able to do that. There's also a parachute that can help with mobility and survival. If you have a bike and you're rammed and you catapult off a cliff, you can possibly do a parachute to not immediately splat on the ground, or you could purposefully crash your bike to do that, to arrive somewhere fashionably. They really, really upped their game in terms of what it meant for you to be in this world, and I am actually still impressed, because the jump from 1 to 2, and how it looked and how it ran was just absolutely amazing. So, yeah, besides that, you had a bigger world to exercise your freedoms in, you had way more weapons to do destruction with, and just the lead up to the finale, the entire pre-boss fight was stupid fun. It wasn't the slightest bit serious. It was just the most ludicrous, outrageous, amazing thing. I loved every second of it. There's something to be said for serious climax played for drama and professionally acted and whatever, but what they did flew in the face of all the super gritty grey-brown realism everyone's been doing at that point. It was just so refreshing. So there's no contest between Just Cause 1 and 2. There's just such a wide gap between the two that they're almost incomparable, actually. Moving on to a more popular, more recent, somewhat polarizing game is I would like to mention Borderlands. It's one of my personal favorite franchises so far, because it's very fun, and this is obviously Borderlands 1. It was a very fun, ideally co-op played FPS that didn't take itself too seriously, so you had all sorts of stupidity going on. You could find money in random toilets connected to nothing. Insane midgets were trying to hack off your knees, and God knows what else. It was very fun to see something using humor in that active, trying to use humor in that active way, instead of just everything's grim, dire, we're gonna die. Enough of that. Unfortunately, almost all the locations were brown or industrial grey, but primarily brown. So, as you went through this roughly 20-hour adventure, you would start to have color fatigue. Because that's all you got. I think there might have been one really late game snow section for like 2 entire screens out of 50. So that was horrible. And the DLCs had committed the mistake of making these big open areas that were green, somewhere green. So the zombie expansion was green, but then they screwed that up by only having one fast travel point in basically the entire DLC. So you had a literal 2-minute run to get from the town to the next screen, where there was an NPC who you would have to give brains to, but the brains dropped before you accepted the mission and thus didn't count. So you had to go to him to accept the mission, kill a requisite number of enemies, then go back to him to hand in the mission to get a mission for more brains, and then you had to hunt more, and you had to... This run around was... stupid and unnecessary. This is not gameplay value what you're doing, this is frustration what you're doing. But I think Gearbox has learned from that, so I'm just going to stop ranting right now. But I bloody hated having to do that, let me tell you. So, Borderlands 1 came with some unrefined gameplay elements, certain frustrations present, like the classes, some of them had glaring discrepancies. If you wanted to beat the game quickly, you'd pick Lilith, because her phase walk ability let you run like a lunatic for a few seconds, and that drastically sped up gameplay time. It was also a de facto invincibility card for a few seconds, and if you put your skills into it, Lilith could heal, come out way stronger, and have several bonuses for several seconds. Roland had a piddly, weirdly deploying little turret that would just draw aggro for a few seconds, and, you know, it could heal and it could shoot some rockets. It wasn't completely useless, but one has to wonder between those two which one's better. Never mind Mordecai's useless Bloodwing. It is supposed to do a fair bit of damage and deploy fairly quickly, so it had a short cooldown, but I never found the goddamn thing attacking more than one enemy, and even then it didn't do amazing damage, so, you know, he turned out to be fairly useless. Not even fun, I have to say. But despite some of these issues, the game itself stood on fundamentally solid ground. It told a story, that really simple story, you know. Go here, there's a vault, find it, you open it, get treasure. That's literally the first sentence in any normal game. But the main problem with that was the story itself, that's all you get. If you want to explore the world and the lore, you'll have to read side texts from little mission dialogue boxes. Nobody ever contacts you to explain this. You don't have to go somewhere to see a thing or take in a vista and think about what it means to be on this planet. It was sort of universally reviled, including the final boss, which was really not well done. But yeah, that's a pitfall that they've avoided since, thank God. One pet peeve in Borderlands 1, however, despite relatively solid footing, was that you had a ton of quests where storyline would allow you to go to this one area, go through it, 10, 20, 30-minute thing, beat the boss of the area to get the MacGuffin needed to go on, and then you'd go and you'd find back at the first hub that, oh, actually, a new quest to blow some support pillars has come up, so you have to accept that, go back to that area, and you're not allowed to teleport yet, so you have to manually go back to that area, which takes anywhere from 1 to 5 minutes, you know, depending. And then you have to go up to the start area, you have to sort of go through that area, blowing up the pillars, or maybe going a completely different way you didn't go before, or where something didn't spawn before to kill that, and then you had to walk out of there, and walk back to the hub, so it's more non-teleportation. You were stuck walking when everything was dead, and you were so bored, and it was all brown, and that was the weakest point of the game, is fetch quests, and I suspect some of this was purposefully designed to pad gameplay a bit, but in some maps you have Patricia Tannis's logs scattered around as physical items, you know, hidden anywhere from well to not well. You have to find them, you have to collect them, there's a few, but you can't do that. You cannot interact with the physical, already existing recorders until you accept the mission for them, which comes later, and often forces you to backtrack to old areas. And then you have to drive around those areas, and manually collect all of them. I could have I don't like that. I could have accepted that you got them, but they were encoded and you didn't get the encryption key until you accepted the quest or something. That would have made so much more sense and saved on a lot of running around. Frickin', I know games are a waste of time, but when the games waste my time, now just my biggest pet peeve ever. So when Borderlands 2 came out, it fixed this and many, many, many other issues. Among its chief innovations were a huge supporting cast that was aesthetically more pleasing, better written, simply funny, had their own backstories, their own griefs and worries, but never was it forced on you. Nobody suddenly, unless it were being ironic, nobody suddenly dropped to their knees and said, "My wife's dead! I came to this planet to get away from that!" No, that's not what this game does. Altogether, you also had smoother gameplay, in the sense that you started off in a snow section, the tutorial was a bit more cohesive, and you're allowed to just carefully poke your head around and get into the feel of the game before anything serious happens. It was more well thought out. The entire game took itself even less seriously, leading to some of the funniest characters in gaming. Some of the stuff Handsome Jack says is really, really GLaDOS level funny. Possibly the best character in the series. The script for the jokes and insults was, pretty big. It got lowbrow in places and it got pretty highbrow in places, but it was an effort, and it meshed with whatever the character's portrayed personality would be like. It was just so good to have this loyalty to your own little fantasy world. It also introduced more weapon variety and combat and tactical options, so it had more skills. Some of them were better than the old ones, and they synergized well with each other more. You had a greater variety of grenade mods that did more, so you didn't just have the grenade that you threw and it blew up and maybe it'll do a spark or something. You had a grenade that you let go of your hand, it would teleport like 100 feet to the nearest wall you were pointing at, and then it would blow up there. It doesn't sound like much, but it let you play as you liked. And every one of these new options also came with the currently 4 elementals, because they'd introduced, besides fire, shock, and corrosion, they introduced slag, and I'm sorry, British viewers, for that. It is called slag. That was basically the whatever you hit this with, if it's slagged, it'll take more damage thing, except slag, it can't stack with itself. The story was more audio-visually represented, with direct implications and some amazing moments. So you weren't just stuck going to some guy who gave you an errand and something would happen somewhere that you didn't see, and it wasn't just drab and terrible. You often get to see the result of your actions and others' actions unfold. Early on, and I'm not going to mention anything for spoilers, there is a fantastic thing you can do. It involves a power core and a realization. And the aftermath of that is that you will probably not want to... words. It's just such a good moment. I cannot say this without not spoiling it. So basically, you assist in a city taking off and flying. And it's just phenomenal. They give it the proper badass attitude it needs. As opposed to one where there's this guy in his chair. I killed 5 whatever for him, and here's 5 heads, and he goes, "Oh, give me my money." No, go on. Support characters by script and design are leaps and leagues better than in Borderlands 1. So you have in 2, Sir Hammerlock is introduced. He's got a unique thing. He speaks in a semi-British attitude, voice thingo. Characters have had their continuities pressed forward. Because Borderlands 2 is a sequel, it turns out that Moxie, who you meet as a DLC character, runs several bars. She may or may not be quite honest about who she is, and it wasn't just a rehash. It wasn't just this character's wearing a Santa hat now. It was a proper expansion. Scooter the mechanic, for instance, you hear him a few times in 1, and you find him sitting at a chair and giving you horribly menial tasks, and he literally does nothing throughout the game. His intro alone has more personality than his entire first game, stay. And he plays a key point in several places in the story. So he's not just paint on the wall for this world. He is more like the pillars propping it up. It's brilliant. At least compared to 1, keep in mind. One of the 2 final games I'm going to quickly discuss, because I don't want this to run on long and it's already half an hour almost, is Mass Effect. Mass Effect 1 was a really, really odd game. It was a sci-fi RPG with a grand sense and scale, in clearly a bold attempt at something new by BioWare. But unfortunately, lots of creative decisions due to limitations or otherwise have aged this game and rendered the gameplay quite clunky. So it's rather than aging, I meant to say dated. It's very much a product of its time. It was released in 2008-ish, and I couldn't get higher resolution than 1280 by something. So that was very painful for my nice HD monitor, as you can imagine. And having a pop-up that says, press this button to access Origin in literally a quarter of the screen is frightening. but its actual serious problems were the inventory system and weapon modding were very, very bad the first time. You had to stop what you were doing to put this on your gun, to use that gun instead, and you had to look at numbers that weren't always clear, which one's better. Oh, this is stronger, but that one shoots faster, but then it overheats quicker, so, it wasn't as fun as they thought it was. It was a horribly clunky, massively fat inventory system full of menus. No, it wasn't fun, having to navigate that and stop the action, stop the saving of the galaxy to look at if my stupid gun's stupid new recoil dampener was slightly stronger or not. Besides that, the game on release had loading issues. I don't know if this is limited to consoles or if this was on the PC as well, because I've never experienced them, but reports came in when you were in the Citadel, which is a hub location, somewhat. You had elevator rides to mask the loading times, fairly common. Except these elevator rides often had 1 minute of nothing happening. 1 or more minutes of just standing there. It was, shall we say, quite jarring. I don't know whether or not and to what extent it was fixed later, because as I said, I've never experienced it, but I know this was a thing. One huge point away from the game, Mass Effect 1, is the Mako. Just the Mako, that is all. Controls were weird. They were awkward in the sense that you couldn't exactly make your cursor go the way you thought it would. There was as good feedback as in most games, but it still felt like something was wrong. It felt like it moved in increments and not the smooth, actual mouse precision that you'd expect from a game. Possibly, again, because this was a console port as far as I know. Although I have to do some research into that, because now I'm not sure all of a sudden. But I do believe it was an early-ish Xbox 360 PS3 title, which would explain many things. One other thing I didn't like is the weapon system. It was based on cooldown, so you could fire up to a point, and then you'd have to back off, or your weapon would overheat, and you couldn't use it. It wasn't my cup of tea, but it's a minor gripe. It's a unique personal gripe. I think what makes it a bigger gripe in my eyes is that I had a bug instead where in the final battle my weapons would immediately overheat on firing one bullet, so I couldn't use them for literally 10 times like their normal cooldown times. So I had to bring the strongest, bulkiest, dumbest weapons and hope I didn't miss, because I had no way of legitimately beating the game. But fast forward to Mass Effect 2 coming out, you have this wonderful polished product with better graphics, universally better music. You had more options in what you wanted to do, more options overall. It was optimized better, and PC gamers were taken into greater consideration, shall we say. The combat was improved upon, it became actually quite solid. The entire experience felt like a more focused, cohesive thing. Some of the choices from Mass Effect 1 to 2 had carried over and changed your game world in minor or major ways. And that was, nobody's really done that to this effect before. Some of it was just sly winking, some of it was hinting at future possibilities, and most of it didn't turn out to matter too much, if only because some of these choices only paid off in Mass Effect 3. But it was something really novel at the time. So many people took to that, and they should have, because this meant much greater involvement on an emotional level with the game world that you're interacting with. So Mass Effect 2 did the world a huge favor by removing the Mako. I will never not hate the Mako, and I will probably hate it in Mass Effect Andromeda. But moving on. So instead of mindlessly navigating with the Mako across a planet to find one thing on them, you now mindlessly resource mine planets to afford upgrades. Well, possibly not that big of an upgrade there, but it took less time. I'd rather have mine, probing planets for resources than having to use the Mako, because it was a frickin' nightmare. The finale of Mass Effect 2 relied on your devotion to your squad and making the correct choices, being the commander that you're legendarily referred to as in-game. You had to earn your happy ending, because it was absolutely possible to get everyone killed. It was up to you to recognize whose special talents led them to what task in a literal suicide assault, and you could get them all out, and that was a brilliant feeling, because these characters would live on to influence the world in minor, major ways in the next game. So that sort of ramping up, the consequences, earth-shattering at the time. There was nothing like that as well. Not even Mass Effect 1 had dared to touch this. The one thing they did back there was, are you going to go for bland racist, alien racist chick, or bland non-racist, boring white man? One of them had to die and you picked which one. It was just terrible. But, so this wasn't sort of a sharp shift in style as much as focusing your best points down to the tip of a spear and thrusting it forward. It was concentrated with effort, and it put what it had into such a fine point. It's a pretty impressive jump from one game to another in some ways. Now, these games were games that launched in either a terrible state, or they were unfun, or they could have used some improvements, or they were solid, but they could have been more what they were. This next one example is slightly different. This is a game in an established franchise that accidentally stumbles and hits its face on the mud, and gets a rep as being bad. But then that game gets a sequel and gets it corrected. The only example I could come up with to illustrate a really good point was FF13 to FF13-2. 13 released with pretty good graphics, but has garnered widespread criticism for its game mechanics. Some of which include tutorials that last even 10 hours into the game. So you could be well on your way, and you'd still get tutorials for new mechanics that you have never seen before. Another big complaint is it's called Corridor Fantasy because it was too linear. I have a particular issue with this complaint because 90% of video games are linear. And it doesn't matter if you have a 90 square kilometer sandbox, that can be linear too. If nothing happens to move the story forward, if you don't find secrets, if you don't unlock guns or whatever, that's still linear. Think about, some of the best games have been horribly linear. Final Fantasy VI. What do? You go here so that this can happen, so you can go through here so that can happen. People love FF6. And it was exactly as linear as this. So I'm not quite sure what this complaint's about, but I personally don't agree with it. If only because having a linear game allows you to more tightly define what your story is going to be. If you want to tell a very good story, you have to restrict some things so you don't end up with something like... Imagine if a GTA game, you had to go here and you had to shoot down a helicopter with a machine gun to emphasize what your character's aim was like, how good it was that he can hit the rotors, but you instead found a rocket launcher, finished it off in one hit, and the cutscene still treats you as this badass for aiming a huge homing rocket at something that had a heat signature. It doesn't quite work out the same, even though I don't actually think that was a good example of me to give. Another example of a complaint leveled at FF13 was the press X to win combat. So you just attack, and everything will die because the game's easy and you don't need strategy. As both true and false is initially you couldn't do much. You didn't get access to quote-unquote magic and abilities till a few hours in, which did slow the game down significantly, but then it did blossom out into something where you had to apply defensive strategies, preventative strategies, use a status effect to blind an enemy or take away its fangs and, not die in one hit. So, yeah, it was way too late for when the combat let you touch it. I think that the only valid part of this complaint is, yes, they could have done this way earlier, not 7 to 12 hours into the game. And that's just when it starts. 2 hours in, you get access to some magic that you can do something with, but you don't have the full dearth of options till way later in, which was a mistake. Some sections of the game were horribly boring or surprising in terms of enemy strength. So you were suddenly bored out of your mind, and then something comes and slaps you across the face and nearly kills you in 2 hits. But you had a stat cap to operate under, so you couldn't just sort of overpower the enemies. You had to rely a tiny bit on luck or just taking the safe, slow, boring approach. a particular egregious example for me is Snow and Hope. When Hope was about to kill Snow in that whole section before they meet his dad in that one city whose name I forgot, you had the flying units that hit you pretty goddamn hard. Snow was basically useless because his designation at that point that you couldn't do much about was tank. So he took damage and he couldn't really dish it out, and Hope was just all-round useless. So it led to slow, boring battles, which there were many of, with characters I actually didn't care about, by the way. Because guess what? The next complaint is that the characters range from bland to irritating, except for Fang. Lightning's alright, but her whole thing is done wrong. Her thing is, I'm so guarded because, whatever. It's not Japan. That's not going to fly over here because you can't. I'm all for strong women and good heroines and stuff, but she was grating to some people to such a degree that they couldn't finish the game. I personally didn't mind her, but then you have Vanille, who they, I think, purposefully gave possibly the worst voice actor to, because her usual cheery self, even when it's a facade, comes across as very high-pitched and annoying. You didn't really care about Hope, whose immediate reaction 20 minutes in the game was, "My mum died, I'm gonna kill that guy one day, even though it's not his fault." Like, I don't give a shit. This is basic. This is horrible. You have written terrible characters. Only Sass had a bit of empathy when he nearly committed suicide from the burden of what he has to do. And, the whole, I've got to find my crystallized son who may or may not be dead or may not be a monster at this point thing. That was like the only thing. And Fang was just amazing. Story? Well, yeah, it was really confusing. I literally didn't get it the first time I played. I just went through hitting enemies dead and, this is the final boss and I'd beat it and everyone's happy and catastrophe averted. That's done. I couldn't process what was going on. You have an in-game encyclopedia, for fuck's sake. Like, I had to go and look at it and read individual entries to get what the hell was going on. They use abbreviations everywhere. They rely on mixing these abbreviations up. So the SciComm did this, but the governance forces or whatever, and it's just like, holy Jesus crap, please ease off. The story was pretty bad, universally agreed upon. Now, 13.2 came out, which is a direct sequel story and gameplay-wise. Not an immediate sequel, so it doesn't pick up the second you stop, obviously, 13, but it had a faster, more intricate combat system. It gave you more options from the get-go, and it was just better to play with it. Although it wasn't, much the same, they refined it in such a way to make that happen. I should elaborate. The characters were better fleshed out and written, only problem being there that you only really saw or controlled two of them most of the time, Sarah and Noel. But their backstories were given proper weight by better writing. They were presented as three-dimensional characters more so than any one of the other cast. And you didn't sort of not care about them. It was harder to, anyway. Excuse me. So the world itself was more inviting, it was more varied, and it had less funneling. Initially, you still had to go here, to go here, to go here, but then that opened up. You had Zelda-style progression. Zelda-style progression is you go into a room, you have a key. That key can open 2 or 3 doors, and you do the challenge there, and you get a key that you had to use to open the other doors, and then eventually you'd get an item that would let you plunk a switch in an earlier room that opened the ladder up so you can go up to another room. So, that's what it does. It gives you tokens to use however you see fit. And even if there's nothing really to do in the area you go to with your token, you usually do find another token to prevent, road walling. What the hell am I talking about? Ramming your head into a wall. Jesus, hell, I'm got out about it. Sorry. It also helped that they stripped away the linearity sooner, because now you're seeing that they did take criticism of the previous game seriously. They fixed a core issue with it, they moved on. They gave players a game that they wanted to a greater extent, and that listening to your fans is one of the biggest things a developer can do. It shows willingness to sacrifice, it shows willingness to accept and listen, it hints that you are aware that you might not have been right or what you were doing wasn't correct, And it is actually quite rare to see that. It's wonderful, though. Not taking a piss on your fan base, that is. 13.2 had lots to see and do. You had various exploration incentives and side quests. You weren't necessarily limited with those to the final 4 to 6 hours of the game like you were with 13. So you could engage in this side quest, you could go talk to that guy, see what he's got going on, you could fix this time paradox, up to you, mate, up to you. Now, the simple ability to ride chocobos early on without having to wait till 5/6 of the game through and having to prove yourself in a quest, it cut down travel time, and it was brilliant. You know, it ran on a finite resource still, but they were easy to procure by either purchase or drops, and it just shaved hours off the game time where you didn't have to run quite as slowly from one direction to another. Simple little quality of life improvement. Much appreciated. The only issue with 13.2 that 13 didn't have was more and lengthier loading screens. 13 usually was very good about masking its loading screens behind a cutscene that would transition you from an area to another in some form. 13.2, however, well, you have to go here to talk to a person who says, I've got ancestry, so you have to go back in time to poke that ancestor to say, I need this for this guy, and then he says, oh, but I've lost it, so now you have to go find out what happened, and then you have to go through to another previous time, another loading screen, there's 3 so far, to undo the ruins or prevent the destruction of some ruins so you can pass through there in the future. So now you have to warp back to the intermediate time, the first past, and that's 4 loading screens, so you can go through, so you can collect the item, so you can do a 5th loading screen to go back to the first fucking person and give them the item. In principle, if the loading screens were 30 fucking seconds each, well, that would have been way more fun. I understand it's not a non-complex game and it has to load a bit, but Jesus fucking Christ, that gets really old really quickly. It's dangerous to have that much loading in a game. So, a little bit of analysis here. Failure is a serious thing for most people. Never mind corporations with trust and shareholders and money on the line. If you try a $5 sandwich, you know not to have that $5 sandwich again. If I want to make this protagonist, I don't know, dual-wield guns, and that just isn't fun for gameplay for some amazing reason, I've wasted maybe $1 million on modeling, on animating, on making the story be built around this guy, and building him a story, and you know, that was basically for naught. Like, unless the character redeems his or herself beyond the atrocious, possibly atrocious combat. Not meeting one's expectations can be a shock too, so if you deliver a product that you think is good and solid and the audience comes out and says this is bad or awful and gives you really good reasons why that's true, well, that can be nasty, you know, just on a personal level. If you pour your heart into, I don't know, making a necklace, and it looks nice, but then someone says, actually, you know, this is kind of shit because it looks tacky. I mean, why did you make it diamond-shaped, and why does it look like something out of the 80s? There's dissonance there, and that can be quite painful. Never mind to a company that's lost money on this. So, sometimes it's important to take criticism on board. Not all criticism is pure malice and ranting and raging. Even ranting can have a point. I ranted about Persona 1 because Persona 1 was a piece of shit. Unredeemable, not fun garbage. But it's given birth to my all-time favorite series on this planet right now. And it's evolved and it's matured and it's overcome that because they innovated, because they listened to the players. They have created one of the most successful series on the planet right now. Maybe not sales-wise, but it has such a huge fan following that it's just ridiculous. So, if you have a product for a market, you should heed the wills and wishes of that market. I wouldn't get far trying to sell a soccer ball in a fish market. Do you see what I'm saying? Try to put your strong foot forward and offer what the people want. FF13-2 was a better game because it listened and it learned from the mistakes made earlier. Gameplay was made more fun and diverse. Many other things were done. Borderlands 1 was solid but slightly lacking in some game areas, key game areas, but it blossomed into a Beastly Lotus when its sequel came out. It was visually appealing, it had way more humor, characterization, interaction with the world, and that's what fans wanted. Mass Effect 2 gained cohesion from the launchpad that was Mass Effect 1. It managed to hone its focus into a sharp point and benefited from it significantly. Just Cause 2 stopped trying to take itself so bloody seriously and went with the stupid fun route to impress players and critics alike. It was a darling, and it looked wonderful for the time, and on top of that, it ran on very, very modest machines without an issue. It was highly compatible, very fun, and everyone loved it. Not even mentioning that at the time, I think it was possibly the most impressive game in terms of mobility versus scope. It allowed you to clear the huge landscapes quicker than any game I could remember at the time. That didn't feature jets, so Battlefield whatever doesn't count. In Assassin's Creed 2's case, you were completely catapulted from boring, dreadful, bland to a compelling character with a sympathetic story whose journey you wanted to follow, more varied missions. Never mind, the little history lessons and clues that you got, and the faithful architecture that, helped you, even if you don't remember it like I don't, I know that was as authentic as they could make it, and that certainly helped, because I got a good idea of what Italy might have been like at the time. It's culturally important. It had a culturally beneficial leaning, and really not many games do that. So it was very humbling to have that passively enlightening experience on top of a fun murder simulator, which is what it was. Excuse me, I don't have quite good control of my throat today. But more importantly, Persona 1 was a giant, abysmal pile of goop, and I want to emphasize this because it didn't have cohesion, it had frustration everywhere, padding everywhere. I literally loathe almost everything about that game. I only managed to finish it when the updated, quote-unquote, streamlined, and only very, very moderately less annoying PSP version came out. But I could barely finish that one. So, it was tremendously unfun. Just all of it. But, this bastard child gave birth to the Persona 2 duology, which has its own funny story, but I'm not going to go into that. I played those two games, and even though they had some annoying elements like having to do card trades for personas to progress strength-wise in a meaningful way, it had more interesting characters, it had branching story opportunities, it had tougher gameplay, obviously better visuals, a streamlined, slightly faster combat system with combos you could do, and that was refreshing. I enjoyed those games tremendously. Then out came Persona 3, a somewhat radical departure from all that came before it. You still had dungeon exploration at its core, but you had this new element of balancing a social life that would benefit your combat life. The characters, were better written than 1, but not possibly as well written as 2. Either of the two games in 2. But then Persona 4 came around. Put you in the heart of a murder mystery with really, really currently the best characters in the series. Over-the-top action in places, really good combat mechanics. The story was really good and gripping, and the soundtrack was the best thing ever. Now that got an improved version, Persona 4 Golden for the Vita, that added additional content, enemies, bosses, storyline bits. From that, now we've moved on to waiting for Valentine's Day. So the Phantom Thieves can steal our hearts in Persona 5. The world is waiting and watching and clenching its fists in agonizing wait. This entire series has become ubiquitous from the garbage that was Persona 1. It's grown to a series that is widely regarded as having an amazing soundtrack that bleeds charisma and charm everywhere. Solid combat, well-written characters. This is what it's now known for. Persona 1 was the dog confined to a pen that shat everywhere. Persona 5 is the mansion that the Lord will inhabit. It has grown up in a significant way, and I am almost to tears with pride that Atlas has managed to take this mess and turn it into one of the premier JRPG franchises on the planet. It's astounding what this journey was for them. If you are a fan, you probably get what I mean. So the tricky thing then is the fact that you might get it wrong the first time, and many did, despite possibly reaching some sort of commercial success like Assassin's Creed. I think, got enough money to make it back, its production back, but you can stumble hard. You can lose millions of dollars in ideas that didn't work out, and, that means new IPs are rare, and they're discouraged. It's a very sequel milking industry that plays it safe, that tries to build on what was successful once, whether by chance or choice. The ironic thing is, Assassin's Creed is guilty of another thing. Milking a game to be better will inevitably leave it being worse at some point and degrading. So it leads itself to sequel fatigue, and, Assassin's Creed was horrible. Assassin's Creed 2 was legendary. Then they kept milking it. Brotherhood, Revelations, 3, 4, and that seems to be where the series has plateaued. That was the climax. It's constantly getting kind of worse. Unity released in a hilarious state, borderline unplayable. And people are tired of it. No matter what the individual games are, you haven't raised the bar. You've given us the same crap year and year and year again, and we're done with that. We're bored. We want innovations. We want new things to do. And one or two gadgets that you can make combat or stealth quote-unquote fun with isn't going to help if 90% of your games are the exact same. There needs to be more bravery in general in the gaming industry. You have to have the balls to have a unique, brave new idea that isn't the same grey-brown zombie survival shooter or forced teamwork shooter. That's the market right now, and I'm sick of it. What happened to tycoon management games? What happened to point-and-click adventure games? It has been demonstrated through successful Kickstarters already that there is a market for this. And though Mighty No. 9 has all but failed in terms of delivering a good experience, the enthusiasm that saw it get multiple times the pledges it wanted should show any investor, any company, that if you're willing to do a good Mega Man-like platformer, action platformer, whatever you want to call it, people will buy it. Because it's good and it's fun. And now, after the absolute tidal wave of miserable realistic grey-brown shooters, we want that. We want the fun and the stupid and the imaginative and the colourful. If Mighty No. 9 wasn't quite so bad, I'd get it and I'd play it, but it turned out to be a bit of a miss. I mean, oops. And I also mean, so what? Do it again, but do it better. You made the mistakes, you can learn from it. And because it was a Kickstarter, you don't actually go, you haven't lost anything. Backers did, but let's not get into that. I'm not actively trying to take the piss out of a game that I believe it had all the right ideas and intentions, but execution possibly wasn't, quite where they thought it would be. But I want to say that as a footnote for this point is that I do severely miss good tycoon management games. Only really the indie games came out with that. Indie game studios came out with that. Some stuff like Game Dev Tycoon, which seems to ape/pay homage to Kairosoft's game thingo. I forgot the name. I'm rubbish, but it's iterating and it's taking/stealing ideas, and it's not as grand an experience as it could be. My all-time favorite tycoon management games are some of the oldest ones. So Theme Hospital, Pizza Tycoon. I used to like SimCity before they ruined it, and I do mean EA ruined it because Maxis probably didn't have a choice. But now I don't look at SimCity as anything. It's done, it's gone, it's dead, they've killed it. And it's a shame, because Cities Excel, I tried it for a brief period, and it's fun. It might not be completely for me. I didn't give it a good chance, but it's Cities Excel. I don't know if I'm actually... I might mean Skyline. Sorry, I'm getting confused, because there's millions of Cities games. Whichever was the latest one that got the Snowy expansion is brilliant. Like, it's got the systems down, it's intuitive, it's smart, it's simple to control, but it's a complex game underneath. It's so good. People love it. There's a market for it because people love it. People buy it. And it hurts me to see that developers aren't actually putting their best efforts forward in making these games that people want. They're just making the same boring, bog standard, super serious, everyone's gonna die military shooter that we're sick of. I'm sick of it. It's important in the industry and as a person, but especially in the industry, to put your best foot forward or your planned trilogy might end early. If your first game turns out to be so crap that you lose money and you think you can't make another one, if the first one sold this badly you can't make another one to continue the story that might hook someone, then, that's that. Your trilogy's done. Alternatively, a game that you put out for shits and giggles can earn you tremendous praise and money. Think Portal 1, it released as a little nothing game next to TF2 and Half-Life 2 episode whatever. It was literally meant to be a little bonus because they couldn't, sort of justify selling the orange pack as just 2 games. Now, guess what? It became an industry and commercial darling due to its humor, fun but simple gameplay. It exploded. This 2 to 3 hour simple game blasted out of what was it? It was just a joke to justify the purchase of these 2 other better games. Out came Portal 2. It's gotten bigger and better and funnier, and they're probably making Portal 3 if they can count that high yet. It's important to realize what you've got based on the feedback and pursue the hell out of it. If it's bad feedback, you know what not to do. That's going to improve your game. If it's good feedback, we love the humor in Portal, definitely do more of that, for fuck's sake. A learning process can be painful, but it doesn't mean, that you're done. Excuse me. It's important for developers to realize that you can be the phoenix of your own ashes, the ashes of your failure, but you present something wonderfully improved the next time, if not entirely different, if that's the direction you wish to go, then those same ashes might be washed away by the waves of victory. Saints Row 1 was a bog standard GTA clone, right? Saints Row 2 came out and took the piss, and people liked that. It wasn't a super serious gangland style GTA ripoff. It started going in its own direction to Saints Row 3, where you had casual drug use, alien abductions and probing and God knows what else. It was stupid. It was fun. It was GTA that allowed you to go monkey nuts retarded. I love it. Gosh, diversity has a point in gaming. The final point I'd like to make, because I have successfully made this way fucking longer than I wanted it to be, is that keep in mind one thing. All the hype in the world cannot generate goodwill if your game is bad. Spore, dear old Spore, was awful when it came out. It featured one of the worst DRM schemes in history, offering very little actual gameplay, rife with repetition, little creativity, but it was so overhyped that it could never possibly live up to its own potential. Never mind what they did, it would never be the brilliant game that everyone thought it would be. Guess whose fault that is? Another good example of this, possibly a better example, was Duke Nukem Forever. It was in development for, around a decade. So if you heard about this when you're 10, you're now 20 holding down a job with a girlfriend, possibly a kid. It was stuck being developed in the mindset. It was stuck developed in the mindset that it was conceived in. So it was very much a relic of the late 90s and early 2000s. It featured just so much outdated gameplay, shockingly bad one-liners. It was let down nearly every single gameplay front, and that's because they couldn't adapt. They had many design changes and engine switches, but they couldn't make the game fun. They didn't try to innovate. They just tried to do mostly the same thing. Oh, but look, the graphics are shinier. Hype can sell games. Don't get me wrong. Hype can sell games. Persona 5 has so much hype around it, but sales don't mean fans. Fans are the ones who will keep coming back, opening your wallet to you with a smile and asking, "What have you done this time, sir? How may I enjoy what you've done this time?" You have you have fans on your side, you've got it. You don't need to cater to fans, but if you do, and if you do it correctly, because it's the right thing to do, then you have a greater asset in 1,000 fans that buy the next 4 or 5 games than you have in 5,000 customers who just buy the one and hate it. Because you end up at roughly the same net gain, but the fans will tell other people, as I'm doing now, that that company makes really good games, or doesn't take the piss out of their customers, or the games are worth it, or they're fun. I am absolutely behind Atlas as a team, and I'm very proud of what they've done to come away from the mess that was Persona 1 to the breathtaking offerings we're seeing in Persona 5. The trailers, the gameplay videos. I cannot say that it will be as brilliant as it looks. It might be crippled and ruined by its acquisition by Sega. But guess what? It looks amazing and I am excited, and they have not done me wrong. So they have the benefit of my trust, and they have the benefit of my word of mouth that goddamn straight I will recommend Persona series games to anyone I come across who even remotely likes JRPGs. That is what their hard work, their honesty, and their respect of their fans has done. It isn't EA and Activision to shit on people by saying, this is Star Wars, but it's just Battlefront with a Star Wars skin. They let it fester by ignoring cheaters. They put microtransactions to ludicrous degrees everywhere because they want to get more money out of you. That's horrid. That does not inspire a following or a fan base. It is cashing in, it is lazy, it is greedy, and it is deplorable. Guys, if you love the company that makes these good games, it's completely alright to support them. Get the word out, encourage whatever change you think is necessary, because you just might be right, and it just might lead to an infinitely better product or series. Never forget that. This was Chill Naga taking up way more of your time than I deserve to. If you have any comments or suggestions for future topics, you know, I have a Twitter account, I have an email account. Reach out to me, I will consider what you have to say. Peace be with you, and God bless Persona 5.